We're joined by John Elkington. You've written 17 books, many of them about sustainability, and a book recently about social entrepreneurship. You're talking here at INSEAD in Singapore to the MBA students this evening on the business of social innovation, why it's critical for global sustainability. So, bottom line, why is it critical?
In 1994, I came up with the concept of the triple bottom line, just simply to say to the business people that we were then working with, if you think that sustainable development is just about what they then called eco-efficiency, which is how do you make money or save money by through resource efficiency, better energy management, water management, or whatever. That's an important part of all of this, but there's a much broader agenda. And part of that wider agenda, so economic, social, environment, is the social piece. And many people in business have been really quite resistant to that. And many people, particularly in the US business community, have tended to be very nervous about anything with the social term in it. I think we're seeing a sea change, a mood change in all of this, and people are increasingly realizing that making sense of a world of, eventually 9 to 10 billion people by the second half of this century is going to be impossible. It doesn't matter how much technological innovation we do. It doesn't matter how much we change politics and global governance systems and so on. At some stage, we've actually got to get to the point where we don't just change the way that people think, but the way that they behave, the cultures of which they're part. And it's into that area that social innovation potentially plays. And I think increasingly we will see companies waking up to this as an area almost like sort of total quality management. It's something that, well, of course we do that, don't we? And we know how to do that. Whereas at the moment people are still in this slightly hesitant phase of saying, we don't understand it and can you define it for us, and so on. But I think it's coming.
Well, this was essentially discretionary spending in terms of budgets, the whole topic of sustainability for companies. And through the downturn, we'll have seen budgets cut. Yeah. So are we now seeing a pickup again in spending?
Well, I'd in a way be horrified if what we actually were seeing was discretionary spending budgets coming back to scale. Because in a sense, I think that would be a mistake, because fundamentally this is about business models. This is about how value is created, and the basic proposition, for example, of the triple bottom line wasn't that companies should become better at balancing off these different requirements, expectations of their businesses. Instead, what we were saying was that you need to integrate all of this into your value proposition, and as a result of that, if you do that effectively, you'll be creating multiple streams of value, not just simply involved in trade-offs. It's not either or. I think some companies will continue to do it through these sort of softer budgets, but the real challenge increasingly is how do you embed it into the guts of what companies do.
Do you see Walmart as being a leader in this field, and perhaps Marks and Spencer's?
I think Walmart have taken elements of this agenda. They haven't taken the full triple bottom line on remotely. They've actually gone very much for the green or environmental things. They're pushing efficiency, and they have a very strong vested interest in terms of price reduction and all the rest of it for doing it. And of course they can contract out a lot of that pain. They don't incur the pain the supply chain actors do. And then to Marks and Spencer, your example there. I mean, they have always been a retailer which, as you know, have very strong emphasis on quality. And for a growing number of people, this sustainability agenda is actually beginning to be seen as part of the quality agenda for business. And the Plan A program that M&S have had now in place for quite some time is, I think, remarkable. And it's remarkable for a number of reasons, and just briefly, one of them is that the attempt to very actively engage the Marks and Spencer consumer, and they have labeling like where the message is behind the label, and you can look behind the label to see back down the supply chain. I don't think Walmart are going that same route as yet, because they see their a customer base as much more interested in price, much less interested in some of these broader quality issues. So even in the retail sector, you've got some of these giant companies coming at it in rather different ways. But at least now they are coming at it.
Social entrepreneurship still seems to be somewhat on the periphery and isn't mainstream. Do you see it becoming more mainstream, or is this something that is going to remain on the sidelines?
I think we're in one of those periods where, for a bunch of different reasons, you're going to see creative destruction on a scale that is almost unparalleled. The question then is, where in the world do you look for clues as to what the new business models, the new mindsets, the new technologies might look like and how they might operate? The answer is very rarely that you would look at the incumbent companies, because they're still operating and trying to do it more and more efficiently with the old models, the old mindsets. Where you tend to look is on the edges of the system. So the fact that many of these social, and even some of the clean tech entrepreneurs and investors and so on the edges, on the periphery, is almost where you'd expect them to be and where you'd expect the new solutions to come from. So, but to your question of, do we expect all of that to mainstream? I think there would be a massive failure rate if most of those social entrepreneurs tried to drive what they're currently doing directly into the economic mainstream. Because I mean, they're creating social value, which, as we've just discussed, shareholders and financial analysts and others just don't value and don't build into their valuation models. But over a period of time, I would expect to see at least some of the more thoughtful capitalist institutions, companies and so on, starting to adopt some of the mindsets, some of the models that have been pioneered by these innovators and entrepreneurs. So in a sense, to me, it doesn't matter that they're on the periphery at the moment. The question is, how quickly can what they're doing come in and occupy the sort of economic center stage in a way?
Do you think they're making a difference?
I think they're making a huge difference. There's a guy in India called Himanshu Parikh, for example, who's provided, just this one man, he's provided clean water and sanitation to 1 million individuals in India. And time and again, you find these really quite extraordinary numbers. But if they're going to create really effective, really viable, really sustainable infrastructures for the 21st century, they can't do it on their own. They do need help from mainstream companies and from investors, and increasingly, particularly, they need help from governments. And governments in many of the most challenged nations also tend to be among the most corrupt. And so I think one of the challenges that we all have is, how do you address that bribery and corruption issue at the same time? And many people put that very much to one side, and I think it's core. I think it's fundamental.
And in your book, you cite your survey that you did with several hundred social entrepreneurs. Among the key findings were essentially that they felt that there needed to be a change of mindset, as well as support from governments, and perhaps building partnerships and alliances. Were you surprised by any of those findings? And what can be done regarding changing mindsets?
One of the, I suppose, surprises that came back from, yes, that survey of just over 200 leading social entrepreneurs around the world was that if we'd gone out to 200 NGOs, non-government organizations, and we'd asked them, how do you think about business? And do you want to get into partnerships with business? And how would you frame that? And how would you make it operate? The NGOs would still, many of them, be quite conflicted about working with business. The entrepreneurs weren't. They really wanted to work with companies, with financial institutions. The problem that they often reported, though, was that they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have the experience. They were still operating very often like NGOs, and they knew they had to professionalize and operate in a slightly more business way. The mindset shift which I see starting to happen is that a small number of CEOs and of other business and financial institution leaders are starting to realize that these entrepreneurs are very much like NGOs used to be. The NGOs were sort of lead indicator of where the challenges, the issues were going to go, the agenda was going to go. And what these entrepreneurs are doing, whether they're conscious or not, is signaling where the solutions of the future are going to come from.
John Elkington, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks very much.